Welcome back to our channel. The house had never felt so still. The air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable collapse of everything Hayley had worked to build. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain across Fairmont Crest, whispering against the tall windows as if warning that retribution was coming. Inside, in the soft glow of the study lamp, Hayley stared at the 2 teacups on the table, her pulse steady but her mind aflame. Tonight was supposed to mark the end of her fear, the moment she would finally rid herself of Bill Hamilton, the man who had once been her salvation but had now become her prison. She had planned it with precision, each detail crafted with the cold logic of someone who had already crossed the moral line long ago. The poison was her insurance, her invisible ally, a liquid promise whispered to her by Randy in moments of desperation. Together they had decided that Bill's death would look natural, the kind of tragedy that drew sympathy rather than suspicion. It would be quick, clean, and silent just as she needed it to be. But as she stirred the tea, watching the subtle ripples fade into stillness, a strange unease began to crawl beneath her skin. Bill had been too calm lately. His eyes, usually weary with late nights at the firm, had begun to watch her differently, not with affection, but with awareness. He had grown quieter, his words fewer but heavier. And though she brushed off her instincts, a part of her wondered if he already knew. The thought frightened her more than she was willing to admit. Still, fear had no place in her plan. Fear was for those who still had something to lose. Bill, on the other hand, had spent weeks living in a purgatory of realization. He had found the vial by accident, tucked behind Hayley's mirror, small enough to be overlooked but not hidden well enough to escape the eyes of a man trained to notice detail. The discovery had struck him like a physical blow, but instead of anger, what came first was disbelief. He had loved her fiercely, foolishly, blindly. He had believed that beneath her ambition there still existed a shred of the woman who once held his hand without calculation. That belief died the moment he recognized the poison for what it was. Since that day, he had lived 2 lives, the husband who played the part, and the man who quietly prepared for betrayal. He didn't tell anyone, not even his closest colleagues. He wanted to see it unfold, to understand how far she would go. The knowledge burned him, hollowed him out, until every word she spoke became a dagger twisting deeper into his restraint. But when the night came, he didn't rage, he didn't accuse, he waited. Calmly. Patiently. Because revenge, he knew, was only justice delivered with precision. Hayley brought him the tea with the kind of soft smile that could fool saints. She sat across from him, pretending to listen to his tired ramblings about work, but inside she was counting her heartbeats, waiting for the moment it would all be over. She imagined the silence that would follow his collapse, the relief, the freedom, the wealth that would finally belong to her. But in her arrogance, she never considered that Bill might be 3 steps ahead. He watched her pour the tea, his mind eerily detached. In the moment her back turned, he made the simplest of gestures, he swapped the cups. His pulse didn't rise, his breath didn't shake. Everything about him was still, controlled. The very stillness of a man who had accepted that love, once betrayed, deserves no mercy. When she lifted the cup to her lips, he almost pitied her. Almost. The poison took hold slowly, insidiously. At first, it was just a tremor in her hand, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Then the panic began, a tightening of her throat, a desperate gasp for air, the dawning horror of what she had done. Bill didn't move. He simply stared, watching the truth bloom across her face like a revelation carved in agony. There was no triumph in his gaze, only finality. As the minutes passed, the storm outside broke. Thunder rolled across the estate, drowning out her choked breaths, the sound of her body collapsing against the table. The cup shattered, tea staining the white carpet like blood. Bill stood and walked toward the window, his reflection flickering in the lightning. He had imagined this moment countless times, but now that it had arrived, it felt hollow. He had won, but victory tasted like ash. Hayley's thoughts blurred as her vision faded. Somewhere between the pain and the realization, she understood that Randy had promised her control, but what she had really bought was destruction. In her quest to own everything, she had lost the only thing that mattered, herself. The poison wasn't the punishment, it was the truth she had tried to bury. She had believed she was smarter than everyone, untouchable, destined to outmaneuver the world. But the world always finds a way to balance its debts. Bill stayed beside her body long after her breathing stopped. The rain outside washed against the glass, a steady rhythm that seemed to mark the end of one life and the beginning of another. Yet as he stared down at her, the anger that had driven him began to dissolve, replaced by something colder and far more dangerous: emptiness. He realized he hadn't just killed Hayley, he had killed the part of himself that still believed in love, in redemption, in forgiveness. The next morning, the servants found him sitting in the study, unmoving, his expression unreadable. The coroner would call it an accident, poison mistaken for medicine, a tragic end to a troubled marriage. The headlines would call it irony. But those who knew Bill would say nothing. Fairmont Crest was a place where truth and lies had long ago learned to coexist, and this was just another story whispered behind locked doors. Yet beneath the surface, a darker ripple began to spread. Randy, learning of Hayley's death, became consumed by guilt and rage. He had pushed her to do it, encouraged her to take what she thought she deserved. Now, he found himself haunted by the very ambition he had once admired in her. His grief turned obsessive, his nights filled with visions of Hayley's face, pale and still, her lips stained with the very poison meant for someone else. He swore to uncover what truly happened that night, to expose Bill if he could, but deep down, he feared that Bill had become something even he couldn't fight. Bill continued to live, but not in peace. He moved through Fairmont Crest like a ghost, his wealth intact but his soul eroded. The whispers about his wife's death followed him everywhere, a trail of suspicion that refused to fade. Sometimes, late at night, he would walk past the study where it happened, the faint scent of tea still lingering, and feel her presence pressing against the walls. He told himself that justice had been served, but justice, like poison, doesn't dissolve easily. It lingers, in memory, in guilt, in every heartbeat that refuses to let go. Fairmont Crest remained beautiful from the outside, its marble halls gleaming beneath the morning sun. But inside, it was rotting, consumed by secrets that could never be buried. Hayley's death was not an ending, it was the beginning of a decay that would infect everyone connected to her. Randy's pursuit of truth would destroy him, Bill's conscience would eat him alive, and the ghost of Hayley, her ambition, her deceit, her hunger, would haunt them all. For in that house, love and betrayal were two sides of the same poison cup. And once you drank from it, there was no escaping the taste. The storm that had raged over Fairmont Crest finally broke into silence by dawn, leaving only the sound of dripping rain against the glass, slow, steady, and almost mournful. Bill sat motionless in the study, the cup still lying shattered at his feet, its fragments glinting like tiny shards of guilt in the weak morning light. The scent of tea hung in the air, cloying and bitter, mingled with something darker, the faint metallic echo of death. Hayley's body had already been taken away, but her presence lingered everywhere, in the overturned chair, in the stain on the rug, in the hollow that now lived inside him. He had won, yes, but victory felt meaningless when it came at the cost of love's final breath. Outside, the estate was waking. The world would soon begin whispering about the accident, the poison cup, the tragic irony, the beautiful wife who died too young. The papers would call it a mystery, but Bill knew better. It was no mystery. It was consequence. He had not killed out of anger or impulse, he had simply returned what was given. The poison she brewed for him had always existed in their marriage long before it reached the cup. It lived in every deceitful kiss, every rehearsed smile, every quiet manipulation that had turned devotion into strategy. But now, as sunlight filtered through the heavy curtains, the enormity of what he had done began to settle over him like dust. Justice and revenge were supposed to feel different. They were supposed to bring closure. Instead, all he felt was silence, the kind that gnawed at the edges of his sanity. In that silence, he could still hear her voice, soft and deceitful, promising forever. And in some twisted way, she had kept that promise. By the time the servants found him hours later, Bill had already left the study. He stood by the garden window, staring at the storm-soaked grounds where their wedding once took place. For a long moment, he imagined Hayley walking there again, her laughter echoing through the mist. But when he blinked, the image vanished, leaving only the truth. Fairmont Crest was not a home anymore, it was a monument to everything ambition could destroy. As he turned away from the window, the last thought that passed through his mind was not of revenge or regret, but of inevitability. Some poisons, he realized, are not meant to kill the body. They are meant to linger quietly, forever, in the soul.